Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us. This is Talking Politics with me, Dr. Brian Baker, and I'm excited about what we're going to cover in episode 8 today. The question that I present to you is this: how do you know that it's going well? How do you know that it's going well? If I am a voter, which I am, and I vote for someone, whether it be for the president, whether it be for anyone at the state level or the local level, if I vote for this person, how do I even know that it's going well? Now, I'm going to focus on a successful presidential administration just because the time seems that it requires that. But we can expand that to other elected officials as well. But for the sake of time, we'll just look at the president of the United States. Now, before you start saying, well, you're going to badmouth so-and-so, or you're going to say this, we got to get away from that. What we need to do is ask ourselves the question, how do we know that it's going well for whoever's in office? Because presidents come and go. Some will be Republicans, some will be Democrats. Maybe one day we'll have a few independents. I don't know. But this is what I do know, that every president that comes into power, they have a limited amount of time to make an impact. A limited amount of time. At most, you get 2 terms, 2 4-year terms. At the very least, you'll get 1 4-year term to do something. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we know that it's going well? And what are some signs of a successful presidential administration? Now, I want to bring up a few things, and you can always go in and look this up on the web yourself. But I think it's helpful for us to kind of think about a few buckets that we want to pay close attention to as we get closer to the midterms. And of course, in 2028, we're going to have another presidential election, and at that point, there'll be at least two new people on the ballot that we'll have to make a decision about. This comes down to making a decision that we're going to pick someone, because at the end of the day, someone's going to be president. And you have to ask yourselves, what do you want to see that person actually accomplish when they are voted into office? Okay, so let's look at a few things. Now, you want to look at the economy, which is very broad, by the way. So when we talk about the macro economy, we got to get away from macroeconomics and really start talking about microeconomics, meaning what's going on with my wallet, what's happening with the resources that I have. Do I have any discretionary income? Meaning, can I actually go buy a cheeseburger without worrying if I'm going to be able to pay the rent or pay the mortgage? Can I actually afford fuel to put into my vehicle? Or am I going to be adversely impacted if it costs more than $4 per gallon? So those are some things that we need to pay close attention to. Now, here are a few buckets that we want to look at. Let's look at some legislative and policy achievements. Legislative and policy achievements, economic stewardship, crisis management. Crisis management, very big. And personnel's really important. Who is this person actually picking to be around them? Foreign policy and national security. Now, that's a big asterisk that you should put by that one. Foreign policy and national security, people will pay close attention to what the president is doing, because I think in many regards that is something that the president has a very direct, I would say, handle on, or should have a handle on, because as commander in chief, the president of the United States, commander in chief of the military, of our armed forces, foreign policy and national security, that is going to fall into his or her bucket. And I think that's important for us to pay close attention to, especially even now as we're dealing with a conflict in Iran. And not only that, there's going to also be some historical and public consensus about someone's legacy once they have left office. For some presidents, people are happy that they're gone. And in some cases, people would wish that they would come back. Now, I will leave it up to you how you feel about each former president, and I will leave it up to you about the current president. At the end of the day, all current presidents eventually become former presidents, and you'll get to determine whether or not they did a good job historically over time. Okay, so let's think about this for a moment. All right, let's think about this. Let's go back up to legislative and policy achievements. Now, we know that Donald Trump is currently the president of the United States, 47th president of the United States. And the question that we want to look at specifically is this: when we think about legislative achievements, I'm not talking about trying to have a bunch of executive orders, because those will likely be changed out or thrown out or overturned, whatever terminology you want to use. If, let's say, for example, a Democratic president comes into power, the Democratic president is likely to get rid of at least some of those executive orders pretty quickly. So when I think about legislative achievements, I'm talking about what is actually getting done in the U.S. Congress. We're talking about the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. What type of legislation is actually being passed and signed into law by the president that we can look back and say, okay, this is what actually happened. Now, for context, for those who may not be aware, right now, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is a Republican. The U.S. House of Representatives is led by Republicans. The Speaker of the House is a Republican. And in the Senate, U.S. Senate, the U.S. Senate is led by a Republican senator, because the Republicans have a majority in the U.S. Senate. Okay, so you have what's called the trifecta. You have the president, who's a Republican, U.S. House is led by a Republican, and the U.S. Senate is led by a Republican. Now, you have to ask a question, with that being in mind, what legislative achievements have been accomplished outside of signing into law what is known as the Big Beautiful Bill? Now, when we start talking about the Big Beautiful Bill, I don't like to use nicknames. So for those who may be interested, let's do this here. Let's make sure that we have where we can go to find this. So we're looking specifically at the 119th Congress. Okay, 119th Congress, and you're looking at H.R. 1, an act to provide for reconciliation pursuant to Title II of H-Con Res 14. Okay, so we're looking at H.R. 1, and you can go to www.congress.gov, and you'll be able to find where that bill and that law is located, where it became law. Okay, so when we look at these things here, public law, it is there for you to read. I would encourage you to go back and actually look at it. Okay, it became public law back, I have the right date here for you, last year, and you can find that there became law on, looks like it was July the 4th, 2025. Okay, so it became public law number 11921. So please go back and review that if you haven't already. Now, there have been a lot of discussions about whether or not that's actually been good for the American people, and there are definitely some dissents. There are some objections. For example, I'll use like Scott Peters provided a reason why he actually voted against the bill that became law last year. And some of the things that I thought were interesting that I want you to go back and think about, where he mentioned that this new big beautiful bill, quote unquote, cuts over $1 trillion out of Medicaid, which is going to affect more than 17 million people. I don't know if that's a good thing or not for those 17 million people, but it doesn't sound like it. Okay, that's a lot of people. All right. When we think about energy, the bill also rolls back, according to Mr. Peters, some clean energy tax credits that were passed under the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, under the Inflation Reduction Act, and that doesn't sound good. Debt and deficit with an additional $4 trillion in borrowing over the next 10 years. It's considered by some to be the single most expensive piece of legislation in U.S. history. So that's that there as well. I don't know about you, but that seems like a lot. That's a lot of money. And not only that, when you start looking at immigration and deportation, allocate $75 billion to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and that makes it larger than some of the militaries around the world. And I think that it's important for us to think about, is that really going to help most American people when it comes to their actual kitchen table issues? Will that help them? Nothing wrong with having, obviously, secure borders. So when people start saying, well, we want to have the borders to be secure, well, I don't think anyone disagrees with that. $75 billion seems like a lot to put towards ICE, when I'm sure there's a part of that could be allocated elsewhere. I'm not saying that you shouldn't spend money to secure the borders and to enforce all of the laws that's on the books when it comes to immigration, but I seriously doubt that it requires $75 billion to do that, given the fact that they're spending way more money on that. And ICE obviously has not had a good go of it since the start of the year. I think when you go back to what happened in Minneapolis or back in January, and you look at what's happened, when you're talking about Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good, sorry for stuttering there, but you think about that, right? You think about what has happened with ICE and $75 billion based on what they have put out there. Now, again, we're talking about brand reputation. It's not good for their own brand to be shooting American citizens in broad daylight. So that's going to be kind of hard to convince people that you need more money for an agency that clearly needs to look at what they're doing consistently. Now, you might say, well, what does this have to do with signs of a successful presidential administration? Well, a lot of it has everything to do with it, honestly, because you think about legislative achievements outside of this quote unquote big, beautiful bill, which there are a lot of issues that have been raised about, permanent tax cuts for wealthy people. Nothing wrong with that necessarily, but how does that help us get down the deficit if everyone's not paying their fair share? Nothing wrong with people in general not having to pay more taxes than they should, but at the same time, we have to ask the question, is it good to make things permanent when it comes to tax cuts? I mean, if you live here and you are someone who's benefiting from the system, I don't think paying into the system should be that much of a stretch. Not asking anyone to pay more than they should, just their fair share. That's something that will be a point of contention as we move towards the midterm elections. The other thing, though, too, is outside of this large piece of legislation that took place last year, I'm having some difficulty myself finding anything that's actually relevant that Congress has done outside of trying not to release certain files, the Epstein files, when you have to get a discharge petition going back last year to even get that out there. I mean, the truth is that I thought everyone was on board with us not protecting pedophiles. I thought we were all on the same page when it came to making sure that anyone who is committing crimes against children in particular, that we're all on the same page of saying those individuals should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Apparently, there was a bit of a kerfuffle when it came to getting that through. Should have never gotten to the point where we needed a discharge petition. But I digress. My point is, when we look at the legislative achievements, that's going to be hard. So, for example, I want to zone in on this, and we'll probably take a couple more episodes to really go through this. Policy achievement. So let's say, for example, that securing the border was one of those things that we wanted to have happen. And let's say that President Trump, he had success in securing the border. Let's lean into that, for example, because that's an argument that some have made. And if that is the case, I'm not going to shy away from that. Instead, let's lean into that. Let's say that the border is now secure. Okay. Does that help with the price of gasoline at the pump? Doesn't appear to be the case. Does it help with ending the war in Iran? Doesn't appear to be the case there either. Has it helped with the cost of beef going down? Doesn't seem like it. Just because you secure the border, if that's really what happened, that doesn't mean that there aren't other issues that need to be addressed simultaneously. And that's the thing that is important for us as constituents, wherever we may be around the country, to not get drawn into the distraction. Okay, let's say that people had an issue with how immigration reform was being handled under the Biden administration. And let's say that the borders were open and things were just, free fall. Okay, let's say that was the case. Now that it's not the case, if that's the argument some want to make, it still hasn't changed the fact that the cost of living has increased, hasn't changed the fact that the cost of beef, at the very least, has gone up, along with the cost for goods around the country, that's gone up. It hasn't changed the fact that we're spending billions of dollars every day to have a war with Iran, and the Strait of Hormuz is still closed after 3 months. And things have not gone back down anywhere near where they were before. So even if you were to secure the border so that we didn't have just people walking into the country, which honestly, that should always be the case. We should protect our borders. We should make sure that the people that live here are safe and secure because, again, national security. Now, that is going to fall into the lap of the president. So no one's arguing that. And if we need to do things to make sure that we are protecting our borders and protecting our citizens, that's what should happen. However, that doesn't necessarily fix people's problems if they are, say, for example, running a farm and they need to make sure that their costs remain low, or they're small business owners. Securing the border doesn't change the fact that there are economic pressures out there that business owners have to be aware of and they have to pay close attention to. And the global economy, while some may not think that it's important, I can assure you, as someone who has a background in business and understand macroeconomics and globalization and things of that nature, I can assure you that what goes on the other side of the world does have an impact here. And I think with the Strait of Hormuz being closed for the last 3 months, people are starting to see how true that is. So the question becomes, how do we know whether it's going well? That's where we started at. That's where we're going to end at today. And the question that I ask is, what evidence supports that things are going well? That's what I want you to think about as we get ready to dive into this more. When we look at the legislative and policy achievements, we look at economic stewardship, things like gross domestic product. Has that gone up? GDP, right? Have we seen that? Have we seen a change in real wages for people? Have we seen price stability, meaning that there's not some crazy amount of inflation? Are people seeing at the grocery store, at the gas station, are they seeing that the cost of goods and services are stable and or going down, right? Or are they continuing to increase? Are they continuing to increase? That is the thing that you have to ask yourself. How do I know that things are going well? And for a lot of Americans, it's not going well. For a lot of Americans who don't fit into that category of having the luxury of, let's say, millions of dollars at their disposal, but those who are making it paycheck to paycheck, they are saying that things aren't going well. And if you are the president, whoever you may be, and I think President Biden learned this the hard way, that if you're saying the economy is great, and it's not great for people on an individual level, on the micro level, that is not good when you want to get reelected. I can tell you that much. At the very least, it's going to tick some people off, and at the most, they're probably going to go in a different direction. So I want you to think about, as we get ready to dive into some of these topics a little bit more, how do we know that things are going well, and what evidence support that things are going well? So chew on that for a little bit. Go back and read some of the things that we mentioned previously with the big, beautiful bill. Go look for where that's at. Please go to the website itself. Read it. It's important that we read. I will continue to stress that we need to read what things have been written about when it comes to legislation. We need to read about what things are being done when it comes to our government, because if we don't know, we can't grow. So until next time, continue to look at everything, and we'll catch up again soon.